Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Tamron's 5 at 5. I'm Jillian Bell. Today I'm going to introduce some very easy, very approachable macro projects that you can do at home. The simple setup is I will have my camera on a tripod for all of these. This allows you to be hands-free, to be able to manipulate and adjust your subjects if necessary, and it just kind of helps with the play mentality here. We're not going to get too bogged down with the settings, but I am going to set up a behind-the-scenes image as well. So with all of these projects, you will see, for the most part, how it's set up, how you can approach this at home, and we're going to create some fun things today. Number one, oil and water. I love this idea because it is very approachable. You can be, it's for kids, it's for adults, it's for those who are beginners or advanced. There's not a lot of setup to this one. I've got my camera on a tripod facing down. You can see that there's a pie plate there with some Christmas lights underneath, propped up by two boxes. It's very complicated. And the idea here is we're going to create some bubbles with oil suspended in water. The water I have very small amount, so it's like a 1/16 of an inch, just a little bit of water here in that pan. And I'm going to add a couple of drops of dish soap. This changes the viscosity of the water and helps the oil kind of form up and create those circles for us. We don't want suds, we just want a little bit of dilution, so just a couple of drops and then swirl it around a little bit so that it dilutes there in the water. And then with the oil, here I'm using olive oil, but you can use any kind of oil, vegetable, sesame, coconut, whatever you have. And this is what it looks like. The neat thing about this type of project is that there's so many different variables that will create different imagery. If you want different colors in the background, just use different colored lights. I've seen people use a lit image on their tablet set underneath. Changing the image is going to change the colors, going to change the highlights. In this scene, if I wanted the lights to move around a little bit, I just moved the Christmas lights underneath. If I needed the bubbles to move around a little bit, I just blew on the side of the pan. And they just kind of moved around. Number two, now you're playing with fire. So now that we've kind of eased into this, another very approachable setup is the matchstick photograph. This one here, you see I've added a light off to the side. It's simply my cell phone with the flashlight turned on, propped up with the matchbox. The match itself is held in place with an alligator clip over a mason jar lid. We want something metal. You can use a cookie sheet. You can use a flat pan. Anything that isn't flammable that, we can help keep this environment safe. The background you'll see in a couple of these different setups is literally one of my black lens wraps. It's wrapped around a toilet paper tube. Something just to help hold it up. In the cup you'll see some water. You won't see that, but have some water on hand just in case. We want to pre-focus here on most of these images. I'm using my manual focus so I can make sure that that exact moment is in focus and sharp. And that way when we're doing a rapid fire image taking session, that focus won't shift on us. It's one less variable that the camera has to think about. Settings wise, I kind of landed on f8 ISO 200. I was in an aperture priority mode for the first couple of matches just because I wasn't really sure where the exposure was going to set up. Underexposed by 2 stops, again, just to make sure that black background was nice and dark, and I knew the fire was going to be really bright. So this is that moment right where that match ignites. Got the best images when those matches just sort of hit that fire. Found out after a couple that the best flame exposure was right around a 2500th of a second. So then I flipped it over to manual and f8 200 ISO 2500 of a second, and now I don't have to worry about the camera finding exposure. I can just play and light some more up. I also found the smoke to be kind of intriguing. The best smoke was right after the match was extinguished. And that was a little bit harder to capture. I found the exposure here dropping down to a 1/5 of a second, just a lot slower, so you can let that smoke sort of billow and fill the frame. What I actually ended up doing at the end of this session is lighting a separate match, blowing it out, and then sticking it underneath to try to get a little bit more smoke out of it. Backlighting here is key. I moved the light just more over to the side behind the match. That way I can make sure to highlight that smoke and get the most detail out of it. Number 3, splash zone. I wanted to do something with splashing water here. This is a technique that comes up often in macro blogs and home photography. But again, I wanted to make it approachable. I wanted to make it easy. We are going to require a flash here, whether you have an external flash on a wire trigger or a wireless setup. Doesn't have to be in TTL mode. In this case, I was in a manual flash mode. And the first little bit is just figuring out your settings, making sure your exposure is correct at a fast enough shutter speed so that you can stop water. The setup here on the right-hand side, I'm not dealing with a sink. I'm not dealing with a kitchen setup. This is my desk with a casserole dish, a mason jar, and a little teeny tiny tea set. Same background. You'll see also I've kind of threw a handkerchief over the mason jar lid just to give it a little bit more style. I wanted this to look like an English tea party. The spigot there, that's what I used for the water. It's one of those, just oil spigots that I grabbed from one of my clean jars. Clean bottle, clean spigot, fill it up with water and just pour it. You can play with intensity, faster, slower, position. You can move it around. And then it's just rapid fire. This is one out of many. It's one of my favorites. I just love how it kind of froze and gelled over the side of the glass. Settings here, f8 again, ISO 1000, 500th of a second to stop that action. Flash was on manual power, just an electronic trigger at a 1/25th of a second full power. Be very mindful with strobe lights, especially when you're going fast, 5 frames per second, 10 frames per second. That strobing light can affect people's eyes. It can affect, give people headaches, so just be mindful of that. If you are one of those people who are sensitive to that, find somebody else who can pour that water for you and close your eyes. Just hit the trigger. Say 1, 2, 3, go. Hit the trigger and then they'll just pour. Again, it's one out of many. The fun part is going through them at the end. After I got a couple that I really liked the full setup, I moved the 90mm closer to really utilize that one-to-one capture capability. Here, having Peter Rabbit there as my sharp focus point to make sure that we had something to focus on, just letting that water sort of billow over the edge and create a great visual line there. The other thing I did, because not everybody has little teeny tiny tea sets sitting around, I tend to go to antique stores. I love going to flea markets and just finding all these little things that I can use as setups. But I went around my office and found something that is very accessible to most people. Thumbtacks. This is a blue thumbtack pushed into a white eraser, one of those big block erasers, set on top of the mason jar. I basically had the setup already there, and I wasn't going to move the setup. I just put a different subject in place. Swap the background out to a white piece of tagboard. And then it's business as usual, rapid fire mode. My exposure here changed a little bit to a 2,000th of a second. Again, I was trying to capture that splash moment. Captured here a wonderful bottle cap splash. One out of many. I'm really happy with this. Okay, for the next two, game on. We've kind of gotten the creative juices going a little bit. With the next two, I wanted to find another object that you might have in your home, that you might have gathered the family together on a game night, and let's use those subjects. Let's photograph those game pieces. And I use the game pieces because we all kind of know what size the shoe is and the little battleship. Something tactile so you can see the reproduction value of it. Here's the horseman, taken at 1-to-1 macro, f32 on a tripod, 2-second exposure. And I use this to show how shallow the depth of field in macro land really is. You can be at f32 and still your focus distance is really maybe a ½ an inch. But what happens when we introduce extension tubes to the mix? Extension tubes are something that I talk about or comes up in many of my macro classes, so I wanted to make sure to include this example. They're stacker spacers that you put in between your lens and your camera. And if you stack all 3 of them at once, it's extremely difficult to figure out exactly where your focus lies. Again, we're dealing with a centimeter at this point. So I'll set my manual focus to 1-to-1. and I'll find my subject. I know the minimum focusing distance on the 90 is it's 11 inches from the sensor plane. It's about a foot from my eye. So I'll start right around there, and then I'll just kind of move the piece back and forth and until I kind of see where it falls in focus. And then I can set it down and be a little bit more exact with micro focusing and fine focusing, just to make sure that my subject's sharp. Real world application, I also wanted to show, what happens if you don't have the 90 millimeter and you want to do macro work. Let's say you're a portrait photographer and you've been asked to do product work of a game board or of a small Etsy project, a little home project or home product. It is possible with extension tubes. In this case, I'm taking the widest one at 36 millimeters and I'm placing it in between the 70 to 200 G2 and my camera body. Finding minimum focus again at manual focus. Same technique. I'm kind of moving my subject back and forth. In this case, I just kind of use my hand in front of the lens to figure out exactly where my focus is going to lie. 200 millimeter is going to give me that best macro case scenario. So 200 millimeter minimum focusing distance, and then just a little bit of patience. And you get something like this. Again, I like to introduce the idea that macro is very accessible to whatever lens you have with the right accessories and with the right knowledge. This one again, f32, trying to get as much depth of field as I can. I think it turned out really good. The last idea I'm going to leave you with is right around this same sort of avenue. I don't have a macro lens, I don't have the 90 millimeter, but maybe I have the 150 to 600. Maybe I have a 2x teleconverter. These two pieces together really create some really great macro. In a traditional sense, I'm going to take this combination out to photograph spiders or beehives, snakes, anything that is either just out of reach or anything that is living that I don't necessarily want to mess with or scare with my photographs. Gives you a lot of working distance at about 3 feet. And we can really get close up. Half-life size 1 to 2 macro gives you something like this. Same car, same game pieces, same setup. The cool advantage of using the 150 to 600 G2 is you can get an f81 out of it. So I'm just cranking my aperture up, f81 ISO 200, aperture priority mode. Ended up with about 2 seconds on my tripod. And you can really see how that telephoto compression really just kind of compresses all of those elements and creates shapes, creates a really wide working area that you can play around with. The image at the bottom there is the setup. I've got about 3 inches of game pieces there kind of set up to work with, and just little minute adjustments. You can just put them exactly where you want in the frame. Think about shapes, think about spacing, think about these different elements that you can layer together very easily with the right tools. I hope you've enjoyed this short little look at macro photography. Now you get to try. Please go out there, take images. Please stay creative. Please stay engaged. You can find me personally, Tamron USA, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Anytime you use Tamron glass, please use the hashtag #WithMyTamron. You can contact them directly, Tamron Lenses USA on Facebook. We're here with you. We're here at home until we can get opened up again, until we can get out on the road again. Please stay active. Please stay creative. Please stay engaged. We'll see you next time, everyone. Bye.